Okay, good. So we are looking at the general circulation, all the arteries and the veins, the major arteries and the veins that supply the different parts of the body and drain the different parts of the body. So we already mentioned that the artery that goes to the head and the brain is the common carotid artery, which we find here in the neck region. Okay, and we have the left common carotid and the right common carotid artery. Once they get into the head, it will split into the internal carotid and the external carotid. And then the internal carotid will split further again to give some branches, and the external carotid will split further to give some other branches. And those branches supply the brain in what we call the arterial circle of Willis. Arterial circle of Willis. So the blood supply to the brain, there is an anastomosis of blood vessels. So anastomosis simply means a connection between different blood vessels. Okay, so the branches of the internal carotid artery, they form anastomosis around the brain, and that anastomosis is called the arterial circle of Willis. Arterial circle of Willis, or circus arteriosus. Arterial circle of Willis. So the anastomosis, or the blood supply, the connection of blood vessels in the brain, is called the arterial circle of Willis. That is a very important examination question, so don't forget it. But we'll get to know it later when I start discussing each of these blood vessels individually. So we'll take, for example, the carotid artery, and we'll discuss all the branches of the carotid artery and which organ it supplies. So when we start doing that, I will refer you again to, I will mention again the arterial circle of Willis, which is a connection of blood vessels around the brain. So, but from this picture, we see the left common carotid and the right common carotid, and both of them entering into the head. Then just below the common carotid, you see the left subclavian artery and the right subclavian artery. And we said that this subclavian artery is below the clavicle. So it's called subclavian, under the clavicle, and it supplies the muscles around that clavicular region. Everything around the clavicular region is supplied by the right and the left subclavian artery. And then we see a continuation of that artery as the axillary artery. So once that subclavian artery crosses the first rib, you get the axillary artery. And that axillary artery, we say it supplies the axilla, or the armpit, and all the muscles in that region are supplied by the axillary artery. And then you also have the axillary artery on both sides, but from this picture, just the right side was labeled. But know that because you have two axilla, a left armpit and the right armpit, then you should have an axillary artery also on the other side. Now, that axillary artery comes down. You see a continuation of that axillary artery. It comes down and becomes what we call the brachial artery. So initially, we said it was the subclavian artery, and then once it crosses the first rib, it became the axillary artery, and then when it continues down, it becomes the brachial artery. So brachial artery is supplying the hand, or the upper limb, the brachium. Okay, so where you have your biceps muscle, right? That is where you find the brachial artery. So that brachial artery continues downward, supplies all the muscles around this brachial region, or the muscles that originate or insert around this region are supplied by the brachial artery. And then the brachial artery crosses. Now, before the brachial artery crosses the cubital fossa, so this place is called the cubital fossa. Behind the cubital fossa, you have your elbow joints. Okay, so at that place, this artery gives off two main branches. One is called the radial artery, and the other one is called the ulnar artery. So the radial artery is going to supply the radial part of the hand, of the radius, that bone, and all the muscles around that area. And then the ulnar artery supplies the ulnar region and all the muscles around that region. Now there is one artery. I think it was not labeled in this picture, but if you look at this brachial artery, you will see that it gave off one branch here, one branch that comes backward. Is a deep artery. That artery is called profunda brachii artery. Profunda brachii. So profunda means deep. Okay, so this brachial artery gives a branch that is called the profunda brachii artery before it now comes down to form the renal artery and the ulnar, to split into the brachial and the ulnar artery. So remember that, but I can't see that it was labeled in this picture, but it's supposed to be there. Profunda brachii artery somewhere here, this branch going backward. So it's the deep, going to supply the deep muscles that are there. Then we have ulnar and radius, and then lastly, we have this digital artery supplying each of the fingers, okay? And then there is a kind of anastomosis here again, a combination of different blood vessels coming from the ulnar and the radial and the ulnar artery. So we have what we call the palmar arch. So we have the deep palmar arch and the superficial palmar arch. The superficial palmar arch supplies the muscles of the superior compartment of the hand, while the deep palmar arch supplies the deep muscles of the hand, which you did in anatomy first year already. So the same thing you find on the right side, you find also on the left side, okay? So don't forget, we have common carotid, we have the subclavian, which becomes the axillary, continues as the brachial artery, and then we have the profunda brachii artery, which is not labeled here, and then we have a split after the cubital fossa into the radial and the ulnar artery, and then there's an anastomosis of arteries here to form the deep palmar arch and the superficial palmar arch, and then you see the digital arteries coming to supply each digit of the fingers, okay? Then, if we look at the chest region, you will, okay, this is the heart, yes? If you look at the heart, we already mentioned that this blood vessel, this large blood vessel is the aorta, okay? And this large one is the aorta. Now, this aorta that you see here gives off two main branches. Now, look at this, pay attention to this aorta. This is aortic arch. When it leaves the heart, yesterday we were talking about ascending artery yesterday. Now, you will find that this aortic arch on the left side split into two. So what are the two branches? They are the left common carotid artery and the left subclavian artery. Pay attention to this. On the left side, the aortic arch divides directly into the left common carotid artery and the left subclavian artery. But on the right side, the aortic arch only produces a brachiocephalic artery. Brachiocephalic artery. Then it is that brachiocephalic artery or brachiocephalic trunk, if you want, that now splits into right common carotid artery and right subclavian artery. So what is the difference between the right side and the left side? On the right side, the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery did not originate directly from the aorta. Okay, what originated from the aorta was a brachiocephalic artery or the brachiocephalic trunk. Now, why is this called brachiocephalic? Brachio simply means the hand, the upper hand coming down here. So you see that this brachiocephalic artery was what came down. A part of it came here to form brachial artery. So that is brachia. Then cephalic means head, going to the head. So this is called brachiocephalic trunk because a part of it comes down to the hand while a part of it goes to the head. So it's called brachiocephalic artery. So this brachiocephalic artery now splits into right common carotid artery and right subclavian artery. But on the left side, we do not have a brachiocephalic artery. What we have is a direct eminence or direct projection of the left subclavian artery and the left common carotid artery. So on the right and the left, you have a subclavian artery. But the difference is that on the left, the subclavian artery comes directly from the aorta, from the aortic arch. But on the right, the subclavian artery comes from the brachiocephalic artery. So pay attention. That is an exam question. And you're going to be asked in your exam the difference between the branches of the aorta on the right side and on the left side. So the only difference is that on the left, we have direct emergence of subclavian artery and common carotid artery. On the right, you have a brachiocephalic trunk first, which now splits into the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery. Good. Then here, this is the pulmonary artery. The left pulmonary artery is shown here. The right, you can't see it here, it's because it's under this aortic arch. This one, this is pulmonary trunk. This is pulmonary trunk. Now, this pulmonary trunk is leaving which part of the heart? Pulmonary trunk, which part of the heart is it? Which chamber of the heart is it leaving?
The right ventricle.
The right ventricle, good. So now this trunk now splits into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. But you cannot say the right, you cannot say the right pulmonary artery here because this is the anterior view. Good. Now let's come down. Then we said that this aorta will also form what is called the descending aorta. So this is what you find here. This is the descending aorta, this one. And this descending aorta is what will give rise to the other branches that will supply the blood vessels, that will supply the organs of the stomach, liver, and all of that. Okay, will come from this descending aorta. Now, when we get to this pelvic region, okay, we now have two main branches: common iliac artery. Now, this is common iliac artery. But this common iliac artery will split into two. So let's take this common iliac artery, and we said the iliac artery is going to supply the lower limb, yes? So this common iliac artery will split into two. You have the external iliac artery and the internal. So this one, this small one here, is the internal iliac artery. It was not labeled on the right side, but it was labeled on the left side. So this is the internal iliac artery. So this is internal iliac artery, and this is external iliac artery. The internal iliac artery will go and supply all the muscles around the pelvis, and some of the organs that are around the pelvis here will be supplied by the internal iliac, while the external iliac artery will come down to form the femoral artery. But before forming the femoral artery, it will give off a deep branch, which is called the profunda femoris artery. Just the way we had a profunda brachii artery here, this one. So before this axillary artery formed the brachial artery, it gave off a deep branch called the profunda brachii. The same thing is happening here. The external iliac artery will give off a deep branch, which is called the profunda brachii. This is the deep branch called the profunda brachii. Profunda femoris. Okay. In the upper limb, it is profunda brachii. In the lower limb, it is profunda femoris, because this is where you have your femur. Okay, your femur and all the muscles around the femur. So you have here, you see that this profunda brachii is forming some other little branches that are forming anastomosis around the femur. And then you have this femoral artery. So this is the femoral artery. Both of them coming from the external iliac artery. Okay. Now, This femoral artery continues downward. 1 minute. So this femoral artery comes downward, and then it will, below this, your knee joint, you have what is called the popliteal fossa. Popliteal fossa, just the way you had cubital fossa here in front of your elbow joint. Here you have your knee joint, behind it you have the popliteal fossa. So one of these arteries will become, this femoral artery will give off the what we call the popliteal artery, but it was not labeled in this diagram. And then it will now split after passing through the knee joint, right? It becomes what we call the anterior tibial artery, supplying the tibia and the bone and the muscle that are attached to this tibia. Then it becomes what is called the dorsalis pedis. When it gets to the leg, it becomes what the dorsalis pedis artery. Now, all of these arteries are very important. You're going to see the importance of this artery later, because you could also check the pulse of this person in this dorsalis pedis. When you start doing clinical courses and you go to the hospital, you will need to check for the pulse of this dorsalis pedis to know if blood flow is getting to the leg of this person. Okay. Now, so these are the main arteries labeled here. Not all of them, but majority of them are labeled here. So you need to remember the names of each of them. Now, on the other side, you have the veins. So for the veins, this is what we have. Now, where we had carotid artery before, common carotid artery, yeah, now we do not have carotid artery there. What we have is the jugular vein, okay? In the jugular vein. So we have this, what is called the internal jugular vein on the right side. This diagram only labeled the one on the right, okay? So you have the right internal jugular vein, which is draining blood from the head and the brain, taking the blood back to the heart. Then, just the way you had right brachiocephalic artery, just the way you had brachiocephalic artery on the arterial side, the same way you have also the brachiocephalic vein. So this is the brachiocephalic vein. And then a branch of that brachiocephalic vein, you have the right subclavian vein. In the artery, the brachiocephalic artery gave us a right common carotid artery and a subclavian artery. But in the vein, we now have a right subclavian vein and an internal jugular vein coming from the brachiocephalic vein. And then it continues down to form the axillary vein, okay? And then we had, from the axillary vein, you come down, you see the brachial vein. Instead of brachial artery, you see the brachial vein. And then that brachial vein comes down, you now have radial vein. Instead of artery, now you have radial vein and ulnar vein. Yeah, so, and then you have this anastomosis draining the hands, okay, the digits, draining them and returning the blood back to the heart. But all of this blood will come and enter the superior vena cava. So this is the superior vena cava. So all this blood coming from here, all will come this way from the hand and the upper part of the body, and they all enter the superior vena cava, which then enters the right atrium. Good. And then on the lower side, we have the inferior vena cava. So all the blood vessels coming from the lower limb, your pelvis, your abdomen, they all come and join the inferior vena cava, and then also enter the right atrium. So here is where you had your common iliac artery before. Now you have your common iliac vein. And then you have your internal iliac vein and the external iliac vein, just the way you had for the artery too, the same thing. Now, on the right side, on the left side of this vein, you have what is called a cephalic vein. Cephalic vein. You know that now this cephalic vein and basilic vein, you do not have a cephalic vein and a basilic vein on the arteries. You do not have them. You only had a brachiocephalic artery. But for the vein, you have some large veins that are the cephalic vein and the basilic vein. Okay, and the cephalic vein, you see it that it is draining this hand region here, and some of the vessels that came from the head, yeah, because we say cephalic means head. So, and then you also find here, okay, we already labeled this on the other side, radial and ulnar vein. So all these veins, and then from the lower limb, you have what is called the great saphenous vein, and the small saphenous vein. And then you have your dorsal venous arch where you had dorsalis pedis. And then you also have the anterior tibial vein and the femoral vein. So all of these veins come together and they join the inferior vena cava to enter into the heart. Yeah, so this is how the veins drain blood back to the heart, and how the arteries pump, carry blood from the heart to other organs of the body. So very, very, very important. So now I'm going to take you to the quiz where you will answer some questions related to this diagram that we just discussed now. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. Share screen. I'm going to take you to the tests. Give me 1 minute. Okay, good. So let me share the screen again. Okay. Can you see this? Can you see this diagram here? Okay. Now we're going to try to answer these questions, but it seems as if this diagram is okay. Let's try and use it. Let's see what we can get from here, because it seems like it's showing the posterior part. Okay, so here you have number, and then you have the question 1. The dash is indicated by number 15. So which blood vessel is indicated by number 15? Sorry?
Ulnar artery.
Ulnar.
Ulnar, yes.
Okay, ulnar artery. Let's check it. Ulnar artery. Next question. Okay, question 2. Question 2 says which number is pointing to the internal and external carotid arteries?
Internal
Internal
carotid.
carotid.
I think number 2.
Number 2, okay. Check. Okay, question 3. Dash is indicated by number 5.
Number 5 is subclavian.
Subclavian artery. Okay. Next question. Number 3 is pointing to
jugular
Internal.
and external jugular vein.
Okay. Next question. Dash it indicated by question 11.
That is the inferior vena cava.
11, inferior vena cava. Okay. The vertebral arteries are indicated by number.
We did the vertebral artery.
Yes, we didn't do vertebral arteries, but from the name.
Let me just get, I think it's number 4.
Let me see.
It's 4. It's from the vertebral.
Okay, you think it's number 4. Okay. Next question.
Oh, basilic vein is 14. 14. Yes, 14.
Number 14. Okay. The descending
Aorta is 12.
So, subclavian vein.
6.
6. Okay. Number 7.
Axillary vein.
Axillary vein. But you know, from this diagram,
That's
where axilla is here. Yeah, but it's okay. I think it's just the way they drew it.
But it's not, I think maybe it's for subclavian.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
I think they didn't draw the diagram. I think you are right.
This one is the arc of aorta, number 9. The ascending number 9.
Okay, ascending aorta.
Ascending aorta. This is number 10.
10.
Axillary artery is 8.
8. Yeah. Number 1 is pointing to.
I'll go with internal. No.
It's not showing 2 arteries, it's showing only 1 artery.
Basal artery.
Basilar artery, yeah.
Basal artery.
We didn't see it in the diagram in our study because we're looking at the anterior side.
This is the posterior.
So basilar artery. Number 13.
13 is brachial.
Brachial artery. So your score, you scored 15. Awesome, very good. Very good. Now I'm going to share another quiz with you. I'm going to share another quiz with you. Oh, let me see. Okay, they wanted us to try another quiz. Let me see if there is another quiz there. Okay, there is a quiz about the anatomy of the heart, which we didn't finish. Well, let's see if we can do it. Let me share my screen with you again. Share screen, share screen, share screen. So there's another quiz here. The good anatomy of the heart. So from this quiz, you are to identify the different parts of the heart, the blood vessels that come out of it. So let's start question 1. Number 2 is pointing to
the right atrium.
Right atrium. Okay. The aorta is indicated
7.
by. Sorry?
7.
7. Okay. Number 1 is pointing to
Pulmonary arteries. Okay. So, no. I'll go with superior vena cava.
superior vena cava. So that arrow is showing you the direction of blood flow. So blood is entering the right atrium.
Okay.
Okay. This arrow is showing you that blood is entering the right atrium from top. So that is superior. Okay. What is number 8 pointing to?
Number 8. This pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery.
Pulmonary artery. Okay.
Pulmonary artery.
Number 4 is pointing to
Inferior vena cava.
the pulmonary valve is indicated by
5.
Sorry?
5.
5. Okay. The tricuspid valve is represented by
3.
3.
It atrium. Right atrium.
Number 5 is into
Pulmonary valve.
pulmonary valve. The inferior vena cava.
4.
Number 3 is pointing to
Tricuspid valve.
tricuspid valve. The right ventricle is indicated by
6. 6.
the superior vena cava is indicated by 1. Number 7 is pointing to
Aorta.
Aorta. The right atrium is indicated by
The right atrium. 2.
So,
So I have a question.
yeah.
You see the pulmonary valve is separated into 2 places. Why?
Wait, the pulmonary valve.
Like it's when it's going through the pulmonary artery, you see it now goes to 2 sides.
Oh, okay.
What is that?
Yeah, the reason is because your lungs has 2 lobes. So you have the right lobe of the lungs and the left lobe of the lung. Okay, so blood has to go to both of them. So that is why you see that the pulmonary artery splits. It splits into 2, one going to the right and one going to the left, because it is going to the lungs, and your lungs has 2 lobes. Okay. Good. Number 6 is pointing to
the right ventricle.
Right ventricle. Good. You got 15 out of 15. Very good. Very good. Okay, let me take you to another quiz that is different from this one. That quiz will be about, there are some other quiz here about the physiology of the heart, but I haven't, this is anatomy. So even though I explained a little bit of the physiology of the heart, but let's try it. Let's try it. I think with what I explained before from anatomy of the heart, maybe you'll be able to answer some questions also about the physiology of the heart. So let's try this quiz. If you're not able to answer it, then next time when we're doing physiology, because what I'm teaching you now under anatomy of the heart, under physiology, we also do the heart again, but this time we'll focus on the function, not just on the structure of the heart. So how many chambers does the human heart have?
4.
4. Okay. Which blood vessel provides oxygenated blood?
It provides to the heart. Oxygenated. Aortic. The Vena Cavae.
Oxygenated blood. Remember that Vena Cavae is bringing used blood to the heart. So Vena Cavae is bringing deoxygenated blood to the heart.
Okay, the pulmonary artery. I was confused.
Pulmonary artery, where is it going to?
To the lungs.
So if it's going to the lungs, it means there is no oxygen in the blood at the time it's going to the lungs.
The aorta then provides it to the heart.
So it should be aorta. Okay. So the pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood. Remember that the pulmonary artery is the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood, because it is going to the lungs to receive oxygen. So, but at the time it's going to the lungs, there is no oxygen yet. While the Vena Cavae is returning deoxygenated blood from different parts of the body to the heart. But after the blood has been oxygenated and the blood enters the left atrium, and then from the left atrium it enters the left ventricle, then the heart now pumps it into the aorta. So the aorta is the one that provides oxygenated blood to the body, different parts of the body. Okay. Which type of vessels contain valves?
Which type of vessels contain? The vein.
Okay.
The vein. And that cups or something.
Okay. How thick is the wall of a capillary?
1 cell.
1 cell. Thick. Okay.
I think
What is the network of capillaries called?
has to be called a capillary system.
You remember when I showed you the diagram of arteries becoming arterioles, and these arterioles become capillaries, and then you have the
Capillary bed.
venules. So what is formed there?
Capillary bed. Yeah.
I think that is what they are asking.
Okay. I thought the question was confusing. What is function of a valve in a vein to encourage blood flow? To prevent reverse blood flow.
Yeah.
This also supplies the heart blood.
I know I mentioned it, and I mentioned a sulcus where that blood vessel is found. But I'm still going to teach it again. I'm going to teach the blood supply to the heart. But I told you that even though the heart pumps blood to different organs, but the heart itself needs blood supply because it needs nutrients, it needs energy, and it needs everything. So the blood has its own blood supply also. I mentioned.
Okay, I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that coronary artery?
Okay. Yeah. Good. But I'm gonna teach it later, and then we'll see all the branches of the coronary artery and which part of the
it's connected. It's connected to the aorta, right?
Yeah, but it's a whole network of blood vessels with different branches, which we're going to look at and see how each of them and which part of the heart they supply. And when we look at it, we will see what will happen when a particular branch of this coronary artery is blocked. When we have atherosclerosis of a particular branch, it will affect that particular part of the heart. So you might have what is called a myocardial infarction. Depending on which of the coronary artery is blocked, then you describe what kind of infarction we have. But we'll look at it later as we proceed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which type of cell carries oxygen around the body?
Which type of cell carries oxygen? The red blood cell.
Red blood cell. I haven't taught this. I will teach it under physiology. I'll take each of the blood cells, the red blood cells, we'll describe everything about the red blood cells, and then we'll take the leukocytes or the white blood cells, we'll discuss everything about them and the different types, and then we'll take the platelets and we'll describe everything and their functions. We're going to do it later, but you're right. What is the function of white blood cells?
The part of the immune system.
Okay.
And the artery. The digestion.
Digestion of the nutrients. Sorry, what was that question? Which of these is not a function of what?
Of the heart, and I think which of this is not function of the heart?
Okay.
What does pulse represent? The blood pressure, the volume of the blood. Okay. The heartbeat.
Okay. But I'll teach you this later.
Blood clots in the brain can cause which event? I'll go with stroke.
Yeah, so when you have blood clots in maybe the carotid artery or any of the branches, you will have a stroke. If you have that blood clot around the heart, you could have an angina pectoris or a myocardial infarction if there's serious damage to the heart.
Why is blood clotting? It looks essential.
Why is blood clotting essential?
To reduce blood loss.
Yeah. In what unit of blood pressure measure?
I think is mmHg.
So millimeters mercury. Okay. So mmHg is millimeters mercury. Good. 15 out of 15. Very good. So in our subsequent anatomy lesson, I will need to teach you what is called the cardiac circle. So in the cardiac circle, we would look at what is called systole and diastole. Systole and diastole. We look at
the circle of Willis.
Yeah, circle of Willis. When we start, yeah, we look at circle of Willis and the branches, all of the branches of the artery. We look at each of them, and we'll look at the circle of Willis also. And then we would look at how to calculate the cardiac output, how to measure the heartbeat, and a whole lot of things we need to look at. And in physiology, I'll also teach you the same thing, but with a broad explanation, go deeper into the functions, and I might add a little pathophysiology, what will happen if a particular function is altered or is obstructed. So we'll look at what happened. But I'm going to give you one more quiz, a very short one. We might not finish it, but I think I saw there's one quiz I would like you to do. Let me see if I can find it. I saw one quiz. Let's see. So this quiz, let me share my screen with you. Okay, so share screen. So this quiz says, what is the correct path through the circulatory system, which describes the passage of blood originating in the left leg? What is the correct path through the circulatory system, which describes the passage of blood originating in the left leg? So A, you have vena cava to left atrium, to left ventricle, to lungs, to right atrium, to right ventricle, and then aorta. B, you have vena cava to left atrium, to right atrium, to lungs, to left ventricle, to right ventricle, to aorta. C, you have vena cava to right atrium, to right ventricle, to lungs, to left atrium, to left ventricle, to aorta. D, you have vena cava to right atrium, to left atrium, to lungs, to right ventricle, to left ventricle, and to aorta. What do you think?
I'll go with D.
D. So the blood coming from the left leg passes through the vena cava to the right atrium, to the right ventricle, to the lungs to receive oxygen, comes back to the left atrium, and then the left ventricle and the aorta. Okay.
C.
Good, you are right. Next question. Which heart valves are not actively closed by the contraction of muscular structures? Which heart valves are not actively closed by the contraction of muscular structures? You would guess an answer because I'm not sure if I taught this, but we're going to do it when we're talking about the cardiac circle, the diastole and the systole I talked about. We are going to look at it, but guess an answer. I know I mentioned lob, dub. Yeah?
Yeah, yes, you did.
So what do you think is the answer?
Mitral.
Mitral valve. So mitral valve is between
The aorta and
left
the
atrium and left ventricle. Yeah. So it doesn't close. We said that we hear the sound lob dub by the closure of the mitral and the tricuspid valve, isn't it? Okay. Let's see your answer. Okay.
It's not deep.
Let's see your answer. If you are right, they'll tell you you're right. If you're wrong, they'll tell you you're wrong. So check wrong. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. So check another one because the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve, they actually close. That is the sound you hear as the lob dub sound. And those valves are actually found between the atrial and the ventricle, and the atrioventricular valves. So you have your semilunar valve. Your semilunar valve is your aortic and your pulmonary valve. That is the correct answer. The aortic and your pulmonary valve are the semilunar valve. But I think I'll teach it again when we're looking at the cardiac circle, diastole, and the systole, and then we'll go in details about the closure of the valves. And you know, the valves, the aortic valve is found between the aorta, yes, and where? Left ventricle.
The aortic and the left ventricle, yes.
So if the left ventricle is contracting to push blood out of the heart, should the aortic valve be closed? If the aortic valve is closed when the heart is contracting, okay, when the ventricle is contracting, it means that blood cannot go out of the aorta. So that is why the aortic valve is not actively closed by the contraction of muscular structure. Because if it is closed, it means that blood cannot pass through when the contraction is going on. And it means no blood will enter the aorta, okay? So the same thing happens to the pulmonary valve also. If it is actively closed, when the right ventricle is contracting, it means that blood cannot enter into the pulmonary artery, okay? But I will explain it further as we proceed with other topics, okay? This question also, I think it has to do with, in terms of being open or closed, what is the state of the mitral and tricuspid valve, left and right atrioventricular valve, respectively, at the end of the first heart sound? At the end of the first heart sound. What do you think?
Mitral is closed, tricuspid is open. First heart sound.
If mitral is closed, tricuspid should be closed also. You know why? Because both of them are between the atrium and the ventricle, and blood is entering both sides of the heart almost at the same time. Blood is passing through those valves at the same time. So blood is entering the ventricles at the same time, and blood is leaving the ventricles at the same time. So if mitral is closed, tricuspid will not be open. It will also be closed. But I think I will explain it further in when we look at the cardiac circle under systole and diastole. But now I told you that once blood enters the ventricles, yes, blood enter the ventricle, the valves would close. They are closing to prevent what? The backflow of blood. That was what we said, yes? Because when blood enters the ventricle, yeah, from the atrium, the blood could regurgitate back into the atrium. So to prevent that, the valves will have to close. Okay, so let's guess an answer. Okay, the answer you guessed before was what?
When mitral is closed, while tricuspid is open.
You want to stick with it or you want to try another answer?
Both are closed.
You said both are closed. Okay, let's check. So you understand why both of them are closed, yes?
Yes, sir.
From the explanation I gave. Okay. At the instant following the second heart sound, which heart valves are open? At the instance following the second heart sound, which heart valves are open? You would guess. I think I will teach this again. I know I'm going to teach it again so that
you know we didn't talk about the atrioventricular valve and semilunar.
Which one? Atrioventricular valve.
These two, the semilunar
and the semilunar valves.
Yeah,
they are just another name for semilunar valve, just another name for aortic valve.
Okay.
And pulmonary valve. Okay. Atrioventricular valve is just another name for tricuspid and bicuspid. So atrioventricular, so between atrium and the ventricle, yes. And we said the tricuspid valve is between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So it is atrioventricular valve. While the bicuspid valve is between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So it is atrioventricular valve also. So atrioventricular valve is just mitral valve or bicuspid valve and tricuspid valve. Then the semilunar valves are the aortic valve and the pulmonary valves, okay? Okay, so but here they said at the instance following the second heart sound, which valves are open? Which valves are open? So guess.
It's the aortic and pulmonary valve.
The aortic and pulmonary valve. So you mean semilunar valves only? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So if they are open, blood, watch this. At the time you are hearing the second, at the time you are hearing the second heart sound, blood is leaving blood is leaving through the aorta, yes. Blood is leaving through the aorta and blood is leaving through the pulmonary artery. Okay.
Yes.
So, and this blood is leaving the ventricles, entering the aorta and the pulmonary artery. So, but by the time that you are hearing the sound, the closure of those valves, okay, is when you hear the sound. When you hear the sound, it signifies the closure of those valves. So, if the valves open again at that instant, there could be a regurgitation of blood. If the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve opens after you hear their closure, after they've closed, if they open again, what will happen is that there'll be there will be a regurgitation of blood into the ventricles, but they were supposed to prevent a backflow of blood. Okay, but let's check your answer. Your answer, you said what? Semilunar valves are open. So, but I said if they are open, it means that blood can regurgitate back. That's what it means if they are open. But we don't want them to be open. We want them to be closed so that there will be no backflow of blood. You get? So they are not open. Semilunar valves are not open. So at that point, let's see, atrioventricular valves. We've already passed atrioventricular valve because the blood has already left the ventricle. So it had nothing to do with atrioventricular valve. The atrioventricular valves close after the blood left the atrium to the ventricle. So they are closed. And when the blood is leaving the ventricle to the aorta and the pulmonary artery, the valves are open. But once the blood leaves, passes, the valves closes, and then you hear the sound. You hear that second heart sound. But they have to remain closed to prevent the backflow of blood. So all the valves should be closed at the time you hear the second heart sound. I repeat, at the time you hear the second heart sound, all the valves should be closed at that time. Why? Because that sound, sound that you heard is the closure of the valve. The sound, lob, dub sound is the closure of the valve. That is what you hear. So at that instant, they should be closed. If they are open, what will happen is that blood will regurgitate, flow back into the ventricles, and we don't want that to happen. So all the valves will be closed. But I think I will need to explain this further again so that you will get a full picture when I'm teaching the cardiac circle. This one, I didn't teach you this. A given artery has a resistance of 2, what will be mean resistance of this vessel be if its radius were double. I didn't teach you this one. We'll do this maybe when we're talking about the cardiac output and peripheral resistance. So when I'm teaching you how to calculate peripheral resistance, we will do this one, okay? Well, now let's just guess an answer. 1/8. Okay, there's a formula that you could use to check. The formula is that the radius is equal to 1 over, sorry, the resistance is equal to 1 over r raised to power 4. Okay? The resistance is equal to 1 over r raised to power 4. But I'll teach that later, okay? So let's, what physical feature of large systemic arteries make them relatively more responsive to changes in intracellular calcium concentration? What physical features of large systemic arteries makes them relatively more responsive to changes in intracellular calcium concentrations? What do you think the answer would be? I didn't teach it, but I mentioned it passively, and I'll tell you when I mentioned it, when we're looking at the anatomy of the histology. We'll look at the histology of the artery and the vein, and we saw the difference between the tunica media. Yeah. So what do you think would be the answer for this one? What physical features of large systemic arteries make them relatively more responsive? Let me ask you a question.
Tunica media.
Tunica media. Why did you choose tunica media?
Because of smooth muscles.
Good, because of smooth muscles. And calcium help the smooth muscles to contract. Okay. Good. Very good. Rank the following blood vessels in order of their average pressure from highest to lowest. Artery, vein, arteriole, venule, aorta, capillary. So which one has the largest or the highest pressure?
The highest to lowest is B.
B, good, because we said that arteries carry blood at high pressure, right?
Yes,
And the largest artery that leaves the left ventricle is the aorta. So the pressure is highest in that aorta, and then the artery, the arteriole, and then the capillary, and then the veins, which carry blood in low pressure. What layer of the heart would be most immediately susceptible to infections caused by bacteria circulating in the blood?
is the outermost.
The outermost layer of the heart? Are you sure?
Yes. Will be more susceptible to infection caused by bacteria. Okay, the innermost, endo.
The innermost layer, yeah? Endocardium,
Yes.
isn't it? Okay.
Thought they meant from outside. I didn't know.
What vessel carry deoxygenated blood away from the heart?
Deoxygenated blood away from the heart. It's in pulmonary artery.
Pulmonary artery. The only artery that carries deoxygenated blood. How can the circulatory system promote heat retention or conservation, such as on a cold day? This I will teach you under the physiology of circulatory system. So where I will give you the functions of blood or the functions of the circulatory system. And one of them will be temperature regulation. But how does that happen? That is the question now. How can the circulatory system promote heat retention? How can it conserve heat during cold weather?
Can you prevent or promote it? Increasing capillary.
Decreasing what?
In capillary surface area.
Okay, I don't think that's the answer. So what happens? Yeah, I'll teach you temperature regulation later. But when the weather is very cold, you want to prevent blood flow to the surface of your skin. Why? Because when blood flows to the surface of your skin, you could easily lose heat from your body because that the temperature of the blood, when it gets to the surface of your skin, you could easily conduct heat out of your body, but you don't want to lose heat when the weather is cold. You want to conserve or preserve the heat or retain the heat. So what you do, you want to prevent blood flow to the surface of the skin when the weather is cold. And how do you prevent blood flow to the surface of the skin? The blood vessels will constrict. So constriction, vasoconstriction reduces blood flow, while vasodilation increases blood flow to the surface of the skin. So if you want to preserve heat on a cold day, your blood vessels on your skins should constrict to prevent blood flow to the surface of the skin so that you don't lose heat from there. I think that is the answer. Vasoconstriction. I think so. Yes, so that is the answer. So summary, 8/10, yeah? Good, very good, very good. I'm impressed by the test. You did a very good job, very good job. So in our next anatomy class, I'll teach you cardiac outputs and teach you the cardiac circle, how to calculate, how to determine diastole and systole, which valves are open, which valves are closed. I will explain the heart sound again. And then subsequently, we'll look at the branches of all the different major arteries, the branches, and which organ they supply. And then we also look at the coronary circulation, blood supply to the heart also. Good, very good. So if you don't have any question, do you have any question, by the way?
Yes, sir.
No?
Yes, sir. I don't have any question.
Okay, good. So that will be all for today. I hope you go and watch in the next 30 minutes, Euro 2021 final.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. See you soon. Bye.
Sure.